have a lot to cover this evening, so I'd like to go ahead and get started. I watched the first part of last week's lesson, and the first thing that I said is, we have several more lessons to go in our study. We don't. This is the last one, because I'm not going to be here next Wednesday, so this is it, folks. We're winding it up right here. I think this is the 11th class that we've done on the Christian and social media, and so I really appreciate the numbers have held up good. Appreciate everybody supporting it, telling people about it. We've had visitors come, and it's been a lot of fun to talk about it. It's been a little bit scary too to talk about it, but I think it's a very important subject, and I think we've just scratched the surface of all the things that need to be talked about. So I hope we continue the discussion as we go forward. Tonight we're going to talk about boundaries, and I bet you can guess why this is an important subject when it comes to technology and social media and the internet. We have to have boundaries, and God has always stressed boundaries. I think one of the earliest references is here in Deuteronomy chapter 19, verse 14, where amongst all of the commandments Moses received on Mount Sinai, you have this isolated legislation: you shall not move your neighbor's landmark, which the men of old have set, in the inheritance that you will hold in the land that the Lord your God is giving you to possess. Now, I realize this is not about figurative boundaries or rules that you set for yourself. It's about property lines. And that's a border, though. That's a boundary that God is asking people to respect. And it's an old one. It's the one set by the men of old, the ancient landmark, as the wise man says later in Proverbs. And we are to respect those. They go forward. Just because something's old, a rule, a boundary, a border, that doesn't make it insignificant or unimportant or irrelevant. When God sets these commandments and these rules in place, they're timeless, and they should be obeyed by all of us. So a boundary is very important. Now, why are boundaries, borders, limits, and guidelines and rules important? What do they do for us, and how do they help us? Let's get started.
Keep things out that we don't want in.
Keep things out that we don't want in. Good.
Yeah.
Jimmy, you had one.
That's basically the same
She
thing.
stole your idea.
Oh, yeah. Discipline.
Discipline. Very good. We're going to talk about that in just a second. Ownership, yeah, it tells you what belongs to whom. That's a really good one.
Provides just structure for life in general.
Yeah, it gives structure and order. It shows you the shape of things. It sets limits that help us know our role and know what we're supposed to do in life and where we can do it and what we're capable of, what's dangerous to us and what's safe for us. So boundaries are very, very important. And another great use, to get back, I think it was Ron who said discipline, they help us with discipline, which is extremely difficult. I want you to look at this passage from 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 25 through 27. Paul says, every athlete exercises self-control in all things. They, the athletes, do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we, the Christians, and Paul, an imperishable. So I do not run aimlessly, I do not box as one beating the air, but I discipline my body and keep it under control, lest after preaching to others, I myself should be disqualified. You've heard that before, and maybe you've heard me explain it before, but I want to go over this language in that last verse. It's so interesting, and it's very striking. Now, the English really doesn't bring it out. He just says, I discipline my body and keep it under control. That's understandable, but it's kind of bland, and it's not exactly what Paul is saying. He uses some figures of speech here that really help us see how difficult self-control is. Take the first verb there in the last verse. I discipline my body. I think King James has a closer word in buffet, which means to beat. And that's literally what he's saying. Remember, he's just been talking about boxing, and he goes from that. He's still on that image of the boxer. And he says, I beat my... The word literally means to give oneself a black eye. I give myself a black eye. And the boxing gloves they used back in those days weren't the puffy, enlarged gloves that you put on, but they were basically leather bands with iron and lead embedded in them. So they could do some serious damage to somebody's face. So Paul says, I punch myself in the face. And the second verb is also a vivid illustration. It's the language that would be used to describe a conqueror returning from battle with his conquered people or slaves in chains. So Paul is saying to stay in control lest I become disqualified, I punch myself in the face and lead myself about in chains like a slave. I mean, he's not literally doing that, but the language that he's using here shows how hard, even for an apostle, self-control can be. So if you're struggling with it, don't feel bad. Paul struggled with it as well, as great as he was. And we should know that if it is a struggle, we need every advantage that we can get. And boundaries help us out a lot. Here's how it works. A boundary is a choice. It's either a rule that you make for yourself, a boundary that you set on your own, or one that has been made by God or parents or somebody in position of authority that you choose to follow. So in the end, you're the one making the choice, I'm going to follow this. And once you make that choice, I'm going to live within this boundary, a lot of other decisions are made that will help keep you from temptation. With young people, I use the example, you make the choice not to drink alcohol. And then you know what to say when a friend comes to you later after you've made that choice and invites you to a party where drinking is going to happen. You know that the answer is no. You don't have to weigh it and think about the repercussions socially. You already know you don't drink alcohol, so you're not going to go to a party that's all about drinking alcohol. It's just not going to happen because you made the choice. I live in this circle. I live in these boundaries, and that activity is outside of that boundary. So boundaries are very, very helpful with discipline and self-control. They also, despite conventional thinking, free us to meet our full potential. And this is something that is very, very exciting for me to think about. You can live a better, more fulfilling life within certain boundaries than you can outside of those boundaries. I've been doing a lot of reading in preparation for this class, and there's a sci-fi novel called The Feed by M.T. Anderson. And it pictures a future in which people no longer use smartphones or computers. They just have implants in their head, and they can access the internet and the whole world. They don't think for themselves because they don't have to. The feed thinks for them, tells them what they most desire and what they want and where to go and what to buy and all of that. And it's a pretty scary future. And one of the things about it is the characters in this book, that the young people that have the feed in their head, they go to the moon, because you can do that in these days, and they're bored on the moon. And this one interchange between the protagonist and this girl that he's interested in, he says, the moon's boring. She's like, well, yeah, but I'd like to go to Mars one day. And he says, oh, Mars, I've been there, it's dumb. And it just shows you that when everything is possible, nothing's possible. When everything is permissible, nothing is exciting. And nothing is forbidden, and so nothing is interesting anymore. There's just no direction, no purpose, no meaning to anything when the boundaries are all removed. And I think that's brought out well. We live in an age of limitless possibilities. And I think most people in this class, except for maybe Kayla, most people in this class can remember when you were limited in your entertainment possibilities. Right? You either had to watch what was on TV, or you listened to the music that you had in your personal CD or tape or record library, or what was on the radio, and that was that. You get in the car and you go on a trip. There's not this discussion about which of the millions of songs to choose from that you listen to. You just see whatever CDs you have on hand, and that's what you got to choose from. And it was actually more enjoyable to listen to music that way, because you weren't thinking while you were listening to one song, well, I probably should be listening to this other song. You only had so many to choose from, and so it was actually a liberating experience to have the limitations. And that reminds me of another thing. My dad and I used to go to Russia to teach in a preacher training school. And we'd be over there about 25 days or so. And we would stay in this little flat that had no internet access. This was in the late 90s and early 2000s. And there was TV, but we didn't understand what people were saying on the TV, so it wasn't worth watching the TV. The only thing we had as an entertainment option was 6 or 8 videotapes full of John Wayne movies. Now, Charles Lee would be in hog heaven, but I wasn't really a John Wayne fan, and my dad wasn't either, but we became John Wayne fans in that flat in Russia because that was all we had to choose from. There was no argument over what to watch because there were no choices on it. It was just that, and we were glad to have it, and we enjoyed it and had a good time watching it. These days, you just are not satisfied with anything because there's so many possibilities. What I'm trying to get you to see is that when there are no limitations, life is not as good. It's not as fulfilling. You're not as happy with those kinds of things. Poets have known this for a long time. I don't want to bore you to death with this. I'm hoping that I can make this point. But poets have always used form. Even when a poem looks like it doesn't have a form, it has a form. It's just a little more elusive. And the reason they use forms is because they know this secret that the form triggers a creative energy that they wouldn't have otherwise. And so they write with a particular meter or rhyme or both, or they write a sonnet with certain rules to go by, or a haiku with certain rules that you have to live by. And that restraining force releases creative energy that they wouldn't have had otherwise. This is Robert Frost. He wrote in something called blank verse, which is iambic pentameter with no rhyme scheme most of the time. And somebody writing about him said this: the self-imposed restrictions of meter, see, nobody put it on him. He chose, I'm going to live within this boundary of blank verse, in form and of coherence in the content work to a poet's advantage. They liberate him from the experimentalist burden, those who choose no boundaries, the perpetual search for new forms and alternative structures. The rest of the quote is, thus Frost, as he himself put it in an essay that he wrote his verse regular. He never completely abandoned conventional metrical forms for free verse, as so many of his contemporaries were doing. He believed it an advantage to be restrained within that particular form. Maybe you studied Paradise Lost. That's another example of blank verse. John Milton wrote that. Doesn't rhyme, right? It has meter to it. And that was considered apostasy by the poets back in John Milton's day. This one guy, I skipped that. I'll just go ahead and go to John Dryden. John Dryden was a contemporary Milton, and he made this critical comment of Paradise Lost. He said, for imagination in a poet is a faculty so wild and lawless that like a high-ranging spaniel, it must have clogs tied to it, lest it outrun the judgment. The great easiness of blank verse renders the poet too luxuriant. Well, he would go crazy if he saw some of the stuff written today. What he's saying there, I saw some eyes rolling back in the head. So what he's saying there is that by eliminating rhyme, Milton was making it too loose and in danger of outrunning his own judgment and being too luxuriant. He's saying the better poetry is that which has boundaries around it. That's basically what he's saying. I'm just trying to get you to understand that poets have known this secret for a long time. That's why Psalm 119 is the longest chapter in the Bible. Psalm 119 is an acrostic. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe it follows the Hebrew alphabet, 8 lines per letter. So there are 22 characters in the Hebrew alphabet, and there are 8 lines per character. And the writer of Psalm 119, I don't think it was David, I believe it was probably Ezra the scribe, he stuck to it. And for that reason, you have one of the most beautiful commentaries on God's word and his commandments that you would not have had if inspiration had not driven that man to write an acrostic. The Lamentations of Jeremiah, all of them except for one, are acrostics. Jeremiah released this prophetic power, or the Spirit through Jeremiah did, using a form, a boundary imposed upon him. So these forms and boundaries are very important. And we need them. And the truth really is that there's no such thing as absolute freedom. I think a lot of people shun Christianity, Christian faith, and religion, thinking that it's too confining. It's like a straitjacket, and they don't want that on their lives. But what they don't realize is, like it or not, you're never absolutely free. You are, in Paul's words, Romans 6:16, slaves of the one you obey, either of sin leading to condemnation or of obedience leading to righteousness, but you're going to serve somebody, whether you like to admit it or not. And if you think that you don't, then you'll find yourself addicted or sick or resentful or guilty or worse. So you have to realize that you need restrictions in your life. One author called them the liberating restrictions that release you to be who God wants you to be, who He created you to be. I've said all of that to say that boundaries are good for you, and we need boundaries on our social media use, on our online activities, etc. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the boundaries. I've got 3 examples, and maybe there's some that you would like to share as well. And we need to think about these. One, of course, is screen time. We've talked about this and talked about the numbers out there. It's estimated now that teenagers are getting 9 hours a day of screen time. That includes streaming video and music, so social media use is about 2 hours a day of that, the same time that it would take in a lifetime to go to the moon 32 times and back. That's a lot of time spent on social media. And we found that the longer we spend in front of a screen, the dumber we get, the more depressed we get, and the less physically well we are. It's bad for your well-being the longer you're on a screen. And this is science now. This isn't just theory or just something that people have observed anecdotally. This is real science. So what do you do to combat that? You set boundaries on how much screen time you're going to allow for yourself every day. It's very simple. You just make a goal. We're here at a new year. This is a good time to do it. Set a goal. I'm going to spend such and such time. Now, the articles I've been reading, if you want to check this person out, the person that's written more about screen time than anybody else is an author named Jean Twenge, Twenge, kind of a funny last name, but Jean Twenge, and she says that, she would rather them spend very little time, but if they had to start someplace, they would start at 2 hours a day in front of a screen, which gives you enough time for other activities that make you well and make you happy and make you more physically fit. 2 hours a day for all that stuff, except for educational stuff and work. So you don't count your time at work in front of a computer, just the downtime that you use on social media. Start with 2 hours and work your way down. We talked in here about Apple's new tool on the new iOS. If you use that will count your screen time. I'm not sure how good that works. I don't know if anybody's tried it out, but again, it's a start to help monitor your usage of screen time. So that's one thing. Another boundary we need to think about is the privacy boundary. Now, we've talked about this in here at length. We had almost a whole class on the importance of keeping something secret. You don't tell the whole world your business. And don't think that because you're on Facebook or you're on Instagram and you have friends that they're really real friends. They're not. At best, they're acquaintances, most of them. At worst, they're complete strangers. And we're just feeding them personal information they have no right to have, nor are they eligible to handle that information. The more intimate the relationship, the more information that you share. That's the rule of thumb. And so if you hardly know somebody, you don't want to tell them your innermost secrets. You don't want to go on some rant about some personal issue in your life. You don't want to share racy photographs with them. You don't want to reveal too much. You don't want to misrepresent yourself. We're not saying that. We're just saying that your secrets are tied to your dignity. And we use Samson, if you remember, as an example. When you reveal secrets to people who have no right to know them because there's no relationship there, the end result is your shame. So stay hidden, and the more you know somebody, the more open you can be with them. Of course, God is the one who knows all our secrets already, and so He's the one to whom we confess and confide the most. Church is supposed to be the place, and I say supposed because many of us struggle with the ideal, but church is designed to be the place where we can come and keep each other accountable, we can encourage one another, stir one another up, bear with one another, forgive one another. The Bible teaches that about churches. So we need to work to make church, particularly those of us here at Ashville Road, we need to work to make this a place where that kind of thing can happen, where people can be vulnerable and not fear repercussions for, confessing sin, for example. James says that in a church situation, you should be able to confess your sins to one another and pray for one another that healing may occur. James 5:16. So privacy. Keep some things private, knowing that you're dealing with strangers and acquaintances online. And then words. So we need to think about words in two ways. The first way is, what kind of words do we allow into our hearts? What kind of words, when we engage in social media or online, what kind of words are coming in to our hearts? That's a very important question. Don't think that those words coming in are not having some kind of an effect on your heart. They are, especially when it comes to young people. We use this term impressionable for a reason. Young people are more impressionable than older people, but that's not an excuse for us either. We need to watch what comes in as well. But studies have shown that young people are extremely impressionable. So if they listen to music, as most of the popular music today is, with sexually charged lyrics, they're more likely to engage in risky sexual behavior. That's just the way the facts add up. And so we need to ask ourselves, what are we listening to? What are we watching? What's coming into our hearts as we look at these things? And it's not just about, although it's very important, it's not just about sexual immorality. We need to think about hateful things that are coming into our minds, cynical things, worthless, meaningless things. This is the part of it that I think we often ignore. Well, there are no dirty words, and there's no non-Christian themes here, so it's okay. Not if you're just wasting your time and you're filling your mind with emptiness. I mean, that's not good either. The Lord wants us to turn our heads to things that are worthwhile and things that will build us up. And so we need to be careful about what comes in. Yeah, Jimmy.
Something you just said a little while ago made me think about something, but it's like,
Good.
If you
I was hoping for that.
This mind does work sometimes.
Yeah.
No, like you're watching TV and it'll say the following television show is rated such and such for this, that, the other, violence, sexual situation, such as, drug use or whatever. And or you make the choice in your life where it's like, when we go to the movies, we will not watch a rated R movie because we don't want that feed that what is portrayed in that rated R movie into our lives. But you make that choice. When somebody posts something online, there's no warning. It's like
That's right.
The post is out there. Before you click on it, it doesn't say warning. This post contains some stuff you may not want to see. Or if you hear a song on the radio, even though there are some albums that might have a parental advisory on it, when they play the song on the radio, the theme of the song or even some of the words in the song, they don't warning the song that you're about to hear has some sexually explicit lyrics. You don't hear like a preemptive warning at the beginning. So,
Well, I'm not advocating withdrawing from society or being a Puritan or something like that. What I'm saying is, guard it. Skip it, turn it, unfollow that person, or whatever you can do. Just by seeing it and even being tempted, you're not sinning. You just need to stay on your guard against those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And the ratings even, sometimes you can't trust them. So you do the best you can. Yeah, Ron.
I was thinking about a lot of issues that you've raised, not only today, but I remember for a couple of weeks, I saw on Facebook one time that there was a group, a Church of Christ members group, and I was like, oh, okay, well that's good. Let's go see what's in there and see what the discussions were. and all I really saw was a bunch of bickering over whether you have musical instruments or not, or whether you have singing groups up front, or what's any different between musical instruments and four-part melody and a variety of other stuff, and it was just a bunch of bickering. And I just said, kill it. But going to the idea that if someone young and impressionable will sit there and fall in the trap of something like that Satan has laid in front of us to make you doubt what you believe or why you do. I just said, I don't want to read that junk. And I just unfollowed it because because that was unproductive time.
A lot of young ministers and young Christians get pulled away on the internet, pulled off into radical ideas, and it's sad. But if we think a little bit about being careful about doctrines that are being presented, attitudes, which I think we usually skip over. We don't think about the attitude part, and it's devastating sometimes. Think about so we've been talking about what comes in, think about what's coming out. Your behavior is different online than it is in real life, face-to-face conversations. It just is. I mean, for the most part, most people are the same. So we are harsher, we're more critical, more reactionary online, more likely to share information that might not be accurate 100% than we are in real life. We're not as careful online because we're looking at a screen and we're not thinking about people on the other side of the screen. So we need to disengage sometimes and take some time ahead of getting on your phone and computer to make some boundaries about things like no profanity, speak with kindness. What would Jesus say? Well, build up, don't tear down. Just make some rules for yourself. And it's helpful to post them nearby, but if you just keep them in your heart and know, I'm not going to engage, like Ron's example is good. If I get in a group and it turns out to be really bitter and negative, I'm not going to be a part of that group. That's a boundary that you've drawn for yourself. So those are, I like this proverb, Proverbs 16:23. The heart of the wise makes his speech judicious. He thinks before he speaks. That's basically the idea there. So those are three areas: screen time, privacy, and words. What are some other boundaries that we might want to think about creating for particularly online engagement, but just in life in general? There's a lot longer list here probably than what I have.
Remember Donny Osmond?
I know of him. Yes.
Donny and Marie,
Yes.
and there was a interview a long time ago, and something that's always stuck with me. I don't even know if he stuck with it, but something that always stuck with me was in the interview. He said he's of the Mormon faith, and he said, "I'm going to marry a Mormon girl." And the person that was interviewing said, "You can't say that. There is no way that you can say, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that you are going to marry a girl who is a Mormon." And he said, "Yeah, I can." And he says, "Well, how can you make that statement?" He goes, "Because I'll never date someone who's not."
Mm-hmm. So he made a rule for himself not to date
Yeah, and I think that's
particular
something
people outside his faith.
that we could do is, that's an example. It's outside of the internet, but it's a limitation. If you put a limitation or a restriction on yourself, I will never date somebody who's not a Christian.
You have
You're
control
not gonna
over
marry.
yourself, right? Yeah.
And it's not only that, it's not only just a rule for your general life, but it's also it sets you free.
Mm-hmm.
It sets you free from a temptation or making too many choices. If you ever walk into a place and there's so many choices, you get overwhelmed. You can't make
Exactly.
one.
Yeah.
You'll
It
see
is
the value.
liberating in that way. Yeah. Yes, Linda.
I don't know how many times I've been in a restaurant where there's a family sitting there and everybody's on the phone, nobody's communicating or talking. And the other night I saw 4 people, 2 young girls and parents. The parents were the ones on the phone, not the children. And so how do you teach your kids to limit their social media if mom and daddy don't do it? So if you don't limit yours, you've already lost the choice of limiting theirs.
Right. So there's a very simple boundary you can draw there. No phones at the table. easy to understand. I also think that they're, it's a good idea, except for emergencies, which are rare, to have a time at night where you put it away and it's done, well before bedtime. Just simple things like that. And,
From a time standpoint, I think that's the biggest place to set boundaries, because idle time is never good.
mhm,
And if anything, that's where social media and our phones in general have created a really big gap in our lives, right? You think of the time wasted
yeah,
playing on your phone, and the opportunities missed that
Yeah.
you never regain. And I think that's where you really run into a lot of risk with
Mhm.
those things, is if you're not setting some boundary, you
Yeah.
really don't realize until it's gone. I mean,
Oh,
how
it
many
goes
times have you
fast, yeah.
sat at night, you put the kids to bed, and you're like, let's sit here for an hour and watch TV.
mhm,
And then you look up and 3 hours have gone by, and you're not necessarily watching TV, but you've been playing on your phone or playing games or whatever, and that's time you never
Yeah.
get back.
it's Satan's nothing strategy that,
Yeah,
you
and there's
read about.
there's plenty of warnings about being idle throughout
Yeah.
Scripture.
That's
It's
right.
just-
When I first started this, I was focused on other dangers, but as I wrap all this up, the time element seems to be the most nefarious of all of them. Yeah, Calvin.
Another one people don't think about is the obsession with taking pictures and videos.
Yeah,
They're on vacation and they miss everything because they're video and they're taking pictures of everything. And nobody even sees them but once,
mhm.
if that.
Yeah, it's so easy
All
to
the
do now.
thousands of phones, pictures,
Yeah,
and you're missing everything in the world.
they can be in a beautiful place and they take a picture of their own face instead of what's around them. Really quickly, who sets these boundaries? Let me get everything up here. I know y'all want to know about that crazy guy with the chin hair, but I'm gonna have to skip him. God, and then for young people, your parents, but most of all, you. You set the boundaries, because God can give them to you, an authority figure can give them to you, but you could be like the dog with the shock collar. The wire is all the way around the road, the property. But if that dog wants to get out, then he may decide it's worth being shocked to be on the other side of that wire, and he's gone. And we're like that a lot of times as well. So we have to decide, I want to live in the boundaries because they're good for me and they make me happier and more structured and healthier. And we have to make that decision that we're going to allow those boundaries to be around us and put things in the boundaries. Don't just look at rules as, I'm not going to break the rules. Okay, I'm going to try not to do that anymore. Okay, while you're not doing something, make sure you are doing something. You fill that circle that you have around yourself with wholesome, fulfilling things that promote your own well-being. So that's the last thing that we can talk about here. There's so many more subjects to talk about. Maybe we'll have a part 2 sometime, but I appreciate everybody's participation, and we'll continue to study these things. Thanks a lot.